Okay, morning everyone. Thank you for coming. I know it's Friday before bank holiday and sort of lots of people have got much more important things to think about before the weekend, but welcome to sort of this feedback on the board meeting that took place on Wednesday morning. The usual protocols are sort of observed. We sort of asked for the usual things about apologies and declarations of interest, and nobody had anything to declare, so that was good. But in terms of sort of the appearance, we had the regulatory framework presented to us by our sort of or one of our regulators from Welsh Government. She came and sort of did a presentation just talking about the new regulatory framework as it stands, which is focusing more on sort of what they class as co-regulation. It's also putting the onus more on boards and organisations themselves to make statements of compliance about how they comply with the new performance standards, of which there are 10, which we have to abide by. We have to sort of produce an annual compliance statement. That compliance statement shows how we sort of fare against each of these performance standards. And we have to provide evidence, or we have to document evidence that sort of gives rise to sort of why you think you meet the standard or not, if the case is such. As the regulator said, sort of because you comply or because you don't comply doesn't necessarily sort of go against you, but effectively what it does mean is that you have to have a demonstrable action plan, a robust action plan, if you are failing to meet some of those performance standards or are sort of working towards compliance with some of those performance standards. We produced a draft compliance statement for our board to consider, but there are still a number of areas on there which we sort of still think there's lots of work in progress, work to do. So whilst we consider ourselves a sort of a good performing, top performing association, it's very difficult sometimes to sort of document all of that. When Welsh Government do receive this compliance statement, which will probably be towards the end of July, they will sort of look at that in terms of sort of that and all other information and sort of soft and hard intelligence that they have about the association and see if that tallies. They will then come back probably to us and ask for more sort of documentary evidence. If they are not so sort of, they could consider whether to do that or not. But if they're not so minded to, they will issue a regulatory assessment towards the end of September, we think, which hopefully will sort of just reaffirm our position as sort of one of the sort of 2 low-risk associations in the whole of Wales. We don't think there's any change in our sort of regulatory status, and certainly sort of we were very confident in the board meeting about exposing other people's failings rather than our own. So we did hope that sort of Maria took that on board. We did talk about sort of Q4 performance year to date and sort of effectively the whole Q4 period information. KPIs, a very good set of KPIs, key performance indicators. The only one where we failed to meet target was on relets. Relets had sort of exceeded 35 days against a target of 25. That was frustrating, but just sort of reaffirms the amount of time that we're spending in these properties getting them back up to standard. I'll just mention a bit more about that in a second, but effectively a very good set of performance sort of KPIs. It puts us in the top 3 in most categories across Wales of performing associations, but also we are at the top of some of those KPIs as well in some areas. So we're very proud of what we've achieved so far. What's the old adage, lots done, lots to do. So we went through also sort of talking about the number of complaints that we'd sort of had in Q4. We'd had 5 formal complaints which had gone through to stage 2. But at the same time we'd had 21 formal compliments back about the association. So in aggregate sort of it sounds much better than sort of the complaints we've got against us. But we do have a lot of informal complaints, and board were quite keen to sort of just know a little bit more about some of the informal complaints that we had and how we dealt with those. We did have a quick discussion about that. John presented his value for money strategy and policy. Value for money tries to run through everything that we do. It's all about optimising the most efficient use of our resources. Our resources are not unlimited, they are limited, so we have to make sure that we put them to best effect as far as we can throughout the organisation. It's not just about sort of achieving a few pounds off a contract. There are many ways we can sort of improve value for money, but just sort of trying to sort of score it, monitor it, is becoming an art form in itself. Welsh Government will be issuing sort of more sort of guidance on how to do that soon. In England, there's very much a strong focus on it. Associations have to produce a value for money statement within their annual report and accounts, something that's not mandatory in Wales at the moment, but certainly the Welsh regulator is looking towards moving that way. So if we do make a statement about value for money in this year's report and accounts, it will be a fairly sort of broad statement, but we will have to sort of document and support it at some point in the future, not too distant future as well. We talked about a self-assessment delivery outcome, which was sort of effectively all about delivery, and particularly focusing on housing and communities. A lot of things that sort of have been done in housing communities in this last financial year, the whole restructure, and sort of the impact that's going to have hopefully on frontline service. Universal credit is coming over the horizon, and sort of it will be with us in earnest next year. But I think from our point of view, there's a lot of work that we have to do in advance of that on behalf of our tenants, working with our tenants, try and prepare them for that. You have to remember that a lot of these people have never had this sort of receipt of benefit in this form before, so getting a monthly cheque through the door, whereas sort of those who are in paid employment quite used to having a monthly pay bill and then sort of managing their finances accordingly. These people sort of where they've not had any income, or where they've had income sort of only on a sporadic basis or on a weekly basis, having to deal with budgets in a slightly different way. For a lot of people, it's a whole new area of education that they've got to go through. So some quite intense work has to be done supporting our tenants through this change to universal credit. We are still thinking that there will be no changes to that process post whatever colour government wins. If it's blue, it obviously stay the same. If it's red and blue, if it's red and green, or whatever colours you might like to think of, they may sort of repeal some aspects of changes to the universal credit situation, but I don't think they will change the overall tenor of it. It's still coming no matter what. We had a great presentation from Natasha and Sean on tenant involvement, and that was very well received both by board members and the Welsh regulatory team. They'd had an input to the process as well. This is just showing how we're going to sort of review and sort of engage with tenants over the next sort of 12 months, 2 years. We've got a whole sort of series of actions scheduled to take place. The nature of engagement will change. We're no longer going to be having the tenant forums in the same sort of format as they are at the moment. We will be having a different kind of network sort of grouped, which will take place twice a year. But there's going to be more engagement through the use of social media, text, Facebook, all the usual things, Twitter, any mechanism we can to try and engage, particularly the younger elements of our sort of tenants that we sort of sometimes feel a little bit distant from. So that's going to be quite an important change in our activity. Certainly in terms of pensions, the next item on the agenda, the next serious item on the agenda, quite impacting for everybody in the room. For those of you sort of members of the local government pension scheme, and for those of you who are in the social housing pension scheme, board had a big discussion following a report from an external consultant and a presentation by that same lady to sort of talk about what future route we might go down. Contributions from employers are sort of increasing significantly, so much so that the whole sort of status of the organisation could be put in jeopardy just by the increased level of contributions that we're having to make or might be asked to make. So therefore we're looking at sort of what alternatives we can apply. And following sort of quite a lengthy discussion, the board agreed to sort of keep the existing defined benefit schemes that we've got at the moment with the local government pension scheme and with SHIPs open to current employees. What they decided to do was, for new starters though, the method will change. At some point in the future we will agree a date. Anybody starting after that date will be a member of a defined contribution scheme, which effectively is sort of based on the fact that sort of we pay so much, the employee pays so much, and what your benefits will be are relating to the contributions that you make and the performance of those contributions having been invested on your behalf over a period of time. That's quite a significant change in approach, but for existing staff and for those of you who are in schemes, don't feel concerned because the future sort of looks relatively bright. I think the one thing that sort of just have to sort of bear in mind is that this will be reviewed on a 3-yearly basis every time that the sort of pension scheme goes through a review, which is on a sort of triennial basis. The board will have to review whether the new contribution rates that come out of that triennial review are still available to be paid on behalf of the organisation, on behalf of the employee. So I think that sort of, I do put that caveat on it. At the moment, those schemes will stay open, and they'll certainly stay open for the next 3 years. We've just had the LGPS valuation, so we know what our contribution rates are going to be for the next 3 years for those members. But we also have got a SHIPS valuation which is taking place now, and that SHIPS valuation will be known by the end of September. So board have given some sort of guidelines as to sort of what we would think might happen to that post sort of the publication of that triennial valuation on that scheme. However, for new members coming in, defined contributions is probably what most people are used to now in the sector, and sort of in general sort of business. Defined contribution schemes are very much sort of the vogue, but there are sort of some organisations who are looking to sort of move away from sort of the legacy that they've got in terms of pension liabilities. We know of one major employer in South Wales who's sort of offered to put a significant sum into the Pension Protection Fund, which is the government-backed fund for sort of looking after pension liabilities going forward, so that they would accept all the liabilities associated with that scheme, so that absolves them of any future liabilities. That's quite a change. It's also quite a worry, because the government will be picking up almost a sort of an unquantifiable future liability for a given sum of deposit. So they will take a view on that, but they've also got to consider whether those 7,000 jobs are also important to the South Wales economy. So there's sort of other dynamics to sort of look at as well. From our perspective, contribution rates sort of for LGPS running at 17.6% for the next 3 years from an employer point of view. The board are sort of saying they're quite comfortable with that. If it was to go beyond 20%, then I think they'd have to sort of reevaluate that situation. But everybody who's got benefits accrued until now will be as is. Effectively, up until 2014, those that were on final salary scheme would have that final salary element protected. From 2014 onwards, for the LGPS, there was a career average brought in, so whatever your career average earnings from that period 2014 to the time you retire was also sort of would be taken into account. Most of you would have had, that are in those schemes, would have had pension statements. If you're sort of wanting any more detail, I would suggest that I refer you back to those. I think sort of those people who are a long way away from sort of retirement, which is practically everybody in this room, you'll sort of probably think, it's not worth looking at yet. But I'm of the view that sort of any pension provision that you can make at this time in your life is a good sound investment. There's not many places where you get the investment of you putting £1 into something and your employer puts at least £1 in, if not 2 or 3, to sort of go alongside it. So from a point of view of future protection of your own sort of self-value and situation, then I think it's a sound investment. We've got a few people who are not in any scheme, but we do go back to them on an annual basis and sort of ask them if that still wants to be the case. But they still keep coming back and saying, not for me at the moment, which is a personal decision, and we respect that personal decision. From my point of view, because I'm so close to retirement, it's a bloody good thing. Sorry, pardon my French. I'm almost catching like John then. If anybody got any questions on pensions, because I know it's quite a sort of a particular issue for a lot of people around the room. It's sort of something sort of we do advocate. Our board are very supportive of keeping a scheme open as long as they can. A lot of organisations in this sector have actually closed defined benefit schemes and only offered defined contribution schemes going forward. So we are in a better position than most.
So in 3 years' time, if it continues to go up, you could potentially say we're stopping your GPS pension?
We would re-evaluate. I suspect the view then of the board would be, depending on what those increases were, if they went towards 20%, they'd still carry on with it. If they went above 20%, they'd want to do some mathematical calculations as to what that impact of viability on the business is.
And if new starters were to come from local authority already in LGPS, would they continue on LGPS or would that stop?
No, if they were coming and bringing forward transferring defined benefit packages, then they could transfer in. That was one of the caveats board wanted to ensure that was done. So there was a number of guidelines that they wanted us to sort of adhere to. John and I have got to go back to board in July and present a paper on what sort of defined contribution scheme we would support. But the board have set certain maxims that they want us to abide by. Okay. We had a quick sort of board paper on Schedule 1 items. Schedule 1 is where that the sort of organisation has to report to Welsh Government any sort of instances of payments to related individuals or businesses, and so there's a certain definition for how that relationship works. But certainly in cases of payments and benefits, we've had 2 instances where board have approved the letting of 2 individuals, letting of 2 properties to 2 individuals who are related to members of staff. That's just a fairly straightforward occurrence. Happens sort of throughout all the organisations in South Wales, but we do have to report those back. So it was just a question of sort of agreeing the schedule of report that we sort of took to our board. We then talked about 3 significant papers from Karen's team. The sale of the signing of a contract with a contract for Brookside, the redevelopment of the scheme at Brookside. That will produce 25 new units on the site of the old sheltered accommodation. Effectively, that scheme's let £3.5 million worth of contract going out to a contractor who will be just taking that on board fairly soon. Karen thinks that they'll be on site in June to start that scheme, so that's quite a significant redevelopment of that area. For those of you who are in the know, a lot of activity going on around Oakley Way, just around the corner. And the Oakley Way sort of scheme will be sort of coming through to planning fairly soon. So I think sort of the whole of that area of Caldicot will see sort of quite a massive regeneration and investment. So we're pleased with sort of what's happened so far with the refurbishment at Oakley Way. It's been a fantastic project and very well received by tenants who sort of moved back into those properties with speed, whereas at one time they were looking at speed to move out of those properties. So that's a very positive impact. We sort of also agreed a payment over to Barrett, so on the Taylor Wimpey stroke Barrett sort of development at Wannistow Road in Monmouth. Becky knows the scheme very well. It's sort of not far from where she lives, I think. Sort of we've got a scheme there where we're going to take 102 units from Taylor Wimpey's and Barrett's over 3 phases. And the agreement was to pay over 1.2 million in the next few days to Barrett's to facilitate the land purchase and purchase of some of those units. Hopefully those units will be available to us for letting in June, so quite a considerable sort of change again in Monmouth just with that own development. Karen was up there yesterday and she was saying how good the development was. There's certain little things that were she got sort of questions on the site, but certainly the overall look of the scheme looked very good. If you are passing in that area, it's well worth just sort of looking over, and I think it won't be long before they've got the show homes available, so you'll be able to see what they're like inside as well. We also agreed 5 disposals as part of our asset management strategy. We're constantly reviewing sort of when a property becomes void, whether it's worth investing in that property or just selling it. 3 of those 5 disposals we agreed were at Llanelli Hill, an area which we sort of don't feel has got much future in our involvement. So we sort of sold 3 properties up there. 1 was in Monmouth and 1 was in Cowent. Again, sort of schemes, they're properties that sort of just couldn't have the right amount of investment on them to generate any sort of return for us. So much better that we sell the property, get the capital receipt, which we can then reinvest in purchasing new properties where there is actual demand or where it's a better investment. John gave his chief exec's update, and the only thing on there that sort of what hadn't been discussed earlier in the meeting was sort of effectively the ONS reclassification. For those of you in the know, sort of the Office of National Statistics reclassified housing associations as part of the public sector because of the involvement of many things that sort of Welsh Government had control over us. they're now looking to sort of repeal that. Welsh Government are looking to repeal that through statute. That will take place following the election at some point in the not too distant future. The same thing happened in England with English RSLs, when the whole of the sort of movement was put into the public sector balance sheet, which was a bit of an impact for a short period of time. But England were very quick in sort of repealing that through statute and changing that back so that associations are now back in the private sector. And that's what's anticipated will be the case in Wales in the not too distant future. I had a quick chat about our business plan, sort of the financial business plan that we have to submit every year to Barclays. We've got a £45 million loan facility with Barclays, of which at the moment we're sort of 20 million drawn. We sort of every year have to justify to Barclays what we're going to do with that sort of difference of money. We have a sort of debt line which sort of is on sort of increase up until its sort of peak debt requirement, just over 40 million at some point in the future. That is necessary that we sort of need to maintain that facility because we're going to be spending over £16 million on developments this year and quite a substantial amount on developments next year. So we need the whole of that facility, but we have to go back to Barclays every year and get approval to a new business plan having recast the numbers. So I won't take you through the intricacies of that, but John and I are always having good fun in the discussions with Barclays about who pays what margin. And we ask for margin back, they often want to charge us more, so it's usually a good debate. Some other things that have sort of cropped up in sort of the discussions that happened during the board meeting, where I've not mentioned them so far. The update on Civica, our new sort of corporate system that's sort of being sort of hopefully implemented later this year. Civica themselves agreed to sort of provide us with a hot fix, which we sort of would hopefully sort of fix a lot of the issues that we had uncovered as we'd gone through testing the product. We've had that hot fix delivered to us this week, which was on time. We're still testing it. We're testing it to the point of sort of checking that it's sort of supposed to be doing what it said it's going to do. Previous sort of experience of Civica is that they've said it's going to do something and they haven't quite delivered or not delivered at all. So we're sort of going through that process and testing the product again. I know one thing that they said was fixed hasn't been. Certainly has been uncovered in testing this morning, well, sort of in the last few days. So already sort of there will be a further iteration of another hot fix that will have to be issued. We always thought that would be the case. If these iterations do work, we're still on schedule to go live in October, which is sort of quite a timetable because it means that once we've got these fixes sorted, there's going to be a massive program, intense program of training required for all staff who are going to be using this product. So it will be quite a sort of mammoth training program that we'll deliver. But the product has significant potential. We think it is going to be put us at the forefront of providing a good customer service. There's one or two areas where it it still needs a little bit more refinement, and they will be sort of overcome over the next few releases that are going to happen over the rest of this calendar year and the beginning of the next one. It's a long way behind project timetable that was originally agreed, but there's no point releasing a product that's not fit for purpose. So we'll sort of say no more on that one. Civica have actually committed quite a lot of resource to sort of make it right for us, and we hope that they deliver on those promises. Allied to that, sort of you may have seen in the press and sort of a lot of commentary from our own IT team about cyber security, the sort of attacks on the NHS, sort of which brought their systems to a grinding halt. Really, it's just a gentle reminder, you know, sort of if you do get emails and you even trust the source, or you think you trust the source where they're coming from, don't click on any attachments directly without thinking. A lot of this sort of these attacks on systems only sort of allowed to perpetrate once they sort of click on the sort of links to sites that are sort of less than kosher. But also there's a lot of things that sort of you unlock as soon as you click on that link. It might look kosher, it might be a sort of like an invoice from a sort of supplier that you know. hold the mouse over the sort of link, make sure that you see whether that looks like the kosher site that you'd expect it to be before you should actually click on it. But my advice would be just don't click on it. Send it to our IT team to assess it first before you do. I've already been sent a speeding notice from West Yorkshire Police, which I've never been in West Yorkshire for the last 3 years, so I know it wasn't me. We've also had several requests. I've had 1 or 2 requests from John asking me to pay money over to certain accounts. I know they're not from John because they're too polite, but they're just the fact that they've sort of got email addresses and they're sort of allowed to sort of send those emails internally, or what appears to be internally, just shows how clever these people are. So you've got to try and stay one step in front. We know one organisation that sort of did this checking on sort of sending round a sort of an email with a link in it to see who would click on it, because they put a lot of information in this email to make it appear as though it was a genuine email, having gone through previously sort of telling everybody to be wary of this. And out of over 200 sort of people who'd received the email, 30 clicked on the link, which was a bit worrying, given that they'd just been warned about it. But they sort of then went back to those people and sort of told them this was sort of just a setup. We were just sort of proving that just be careful in future. So they sort of waited 6 months before they sent out another email in a similar vein to all the same, not just the same staff, but all the staff again. And a further 12 followed through, opening up again. So the message sometimes struggles to get through. So my advice to anybody, whether it's here at work or whether it's on your home systems, don't click on any attachments unless you are absolutely certain that it's from a bona fide sort of person sending it to you. A couple of final things in-house. You've sort of all the attendance sort of at the sessions that sort of Graham and Emma sort of running was sort of reasonably well attended, I think. Sort of and people got a lot out of it. We've certainly seen an increase in blog traffic following the sort of the attendance at those sessions. Graham's going to be running a few more, I think, with the tradesmen at the Toolbox Talks, sort of in the not too distant future. So they'll have an opportunity to sort of get more involved in it. But I think generally sort of in-house is a sort of a tool that we can use and make more of. I think sort of over the next few months, hopefully we'll see heightened traffic and use of it. eBuzz is out next week. It'll contain the usual sort of collection of articles and interesting features. Well worth a read. Just sort of put a few minutes to one side to sort of go through it. I'm sure there's the usual competitions in the back of it which cause much interest and sort of sometimes too competitive a nature at sort of from some people. And just an update on tenant board membership and independent board membership. We have got tenant elections running soon. There's 4 people standing for 1 post. Gary Whitcomb is sort of he's restanding, but it's his position that's sort of come up for re-election. So there's 4 tenant members standing in that election. That will be run by the Electoral Reform Society as usual. We've also got vacancies for our independent board members, and we had quite a good sort of crop of applications. We've whittled that down to 7 board members, prospective board members, who will be being interviewed and will be shadowing committees over the next sort of 5 or 6 weeks. So sort of that process hopefully will result in the appointment of a few independent board members to replace the ones that we'll be losing this year and next year. So that's quite an important thing. In terms of board membership from the council, as you know, we sort of have 4 council nominees. 2 of those council nominees, one decided not to stand again as a sort of council member, and one stood but wasn't elected. So they will have to stand down at the AGM. But we're also in discussion with Monmouthshire County Council about reducing the number of council nominees on our board anyway from 4 to 2. So we'll sort of keep you notified as to sort of how that progresses over the next few weeks. Yes, yes. Andrew Martin Johns, it's been agreed that he stays on for another year as chair and as a board member. Andrew has reached the end of his official term, but we got agreement from Welsh Government that he could stay on for an additional year because of all the other changes that were happening on the board. just to sort of ensure that there was some element of continuity. What it will mean next AGM, September 2018, that we will not only need a new independent board member, but we'll need a new chair as well to take over. Okay. Any other questions, comments?
So what's the background of the 7 who stand in as independent? Are they a mixture?
Very much a mixture, but some very interesting CVs to support the 7. The ones that we whittled down we didn't feel as though they had the right sort of background or experience or fit with Monmouthshire, which was important. The 7 that we're interviewing have got a sort of wealth of backgrounds. We've got a finance director from another LSVT. We've got some Welsh Government officials. We've got a couple of retired individuals who've had sort of significant careers in the commercial world. So quite a wide cross range. Yeah. But some very good members as well, potentially. For those of you who don't know, Barry Gallagher is the one who's stepping down. He's the Chief Executive of Drive at the moment in Cardiff, a support organisation, but he has been a fantastic board member. His contributions at every board meeting are always something worth listening to, so he will be a great loss. Okay, thank you very much all for attending, and a good bank holiday.